Cool. So welcome to our live stream if you're watching it live. If you're watching it recorded, welcome to the recorded live video. I have commercial portrait photographer and sports photographer here who has shot on the A9 recently and had some hands-on experience with it, along with me taking it to Sweden for the past 2 weeks. So we're just going to chat about it and talk about a little bit about what we like, what we don't like, and answer any questions that you guys have. So we'll probably save the questions for the end. So if you have them, just throw them in the live chat and we'll get to them at the end. If you don't want to wait or if something's wrong with the stream, we will be posting this afterwards. So just check back to our channel tomorrow. It should be up.
Yeah, and if you have a specific question for either one of us, this is Greg, I'm Rob, so you can pose it directly to one of us. We kind of have a little bit of a different approach in what we do professionally, so some of the questions might be better answered by Greg or myself. So.
Yeah. So I guess to start out, we'll start with the build of the camera. So you're coming from shooting Canon 5D4 and 1DX Mark II. So I guess using it in a sports sense, what are your initial thoughts just on the build quality and how it handles?
I mean, it's definitely a different animal. The world that I come from in digital SLR it's a much larger construct. So both the physical dimensions of the camera, weight, and button locations, things of that nature, there's a natural adjustment as there would be with any new camera. I think for a lot of sport shooters or even people who are typically accustomed to shooting a lot of digital SLR, this camera is going to feel very small. In fact, I added the optional grip to it when I was on the sidelines recently just because it provided a larger base for me to work from. I just am more comfortable with a larger camera. So physically you're talking about a much smaller camera. In fact, I have relatively large hands, so holding the camera in general, I have one finger doesn't even fit on the grip. Yeah. So having a larger grip on the bottom provides a larger base for me to really feel like I've got a firm grab on the camera. But that also poses some challenges when I'm accustomed to doing things like back button focus, whereas on this camera, normally it's a little bit of a reach for my thumb to hit things like back button focus, and I found myself accidentally hitting the record button from time to time while I was shooting.
Like just reaching too far.
Yeah, just reaching too far and getting used to the feel a little bit. A lot of that's just getting more accustomed to the physical dimensions of the camera, but overall it's it feels like any other camera that you would handle as far as the grip and positioning of most of the main features of the camera. It's just a structural build feels a little smaller to me personally. So.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up some good points about the smaller form factor and all that. And I was traveling a lot with it, which made the small form factor really nice. I had originally thought about taking like a 1DX and shooting out there, but having the small one, I could throw this in my bag, I could just keep it on my person, have it on a strap, and it wasn't a huge weight that I was always carrying around and being like, oh, this is such a pain to bring with me. So having that smaller form factor was really nice for traveling around and shooting landscapes and doing video and stuff on the go. So aside from like how the actual feel of it was, I guess we can jump into a little bit of the performance of like the viewfinder and the touchscreen and all of that.
I think one of the things that I would, and I'd be curious over time to see what the durability factor of a camera like this is. And the build's construction feels solid. It feels like a solid camera. Sidelines on a professional sports, whether it be college or pro football, it's pretty rugged, and your gear gets tossed around a lot, and there's definitely some impact that happens on the sidelines, especially when you're going up against things like weather. What's the weather sealing like on it, things of that nature. I'd like to see a little bit more how that handles in very wet or snowy conditions. But overall, I think the construct of it feels very solid. So.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And this does have a little more weather sealing than some of their other cameras, like the A7 series. This is pretty beefed up, or there's gaskets all around all of these buttons. All the doors are sealed shut, so no water can get in there. And if you're using the G Master line of lenses, those all have really solid weather sealing as well.
Yeah. I think from a usability of a physical actually shooting with this camera, there are things that I love about it and things that I'm not quite crazy about or used to on it yet. I think, one of the big issues that I have as a photographer is with my Canon lineup, I have a huge selection of lenses to choose from. And when shooting sports, my go-to lens is the 400 millimeter 2.8 Canon lens. And Sony just isn't there yet with the lens selection. They're getting there quickly. The G Master series in and of itself is a brilliant, very, very fast to focus, very sharp. It has a lot of things that I like about it. But when you're shooting, like say, a night game on the sidelines, and you want a 400 2.8, really your options are to pair it with a Metabones and use a Canon lens, or to use the G Master 100 to 400. And when you're using something like a 100 to 400, you're sacrificing certain things, primarily your f-stop. And that becomes really critical under stadium lights and low light conditions, where you may not want to turn up the ISO as high in order to really maintain and shoot with the camera as you would a Canon digital SLR.
Yeah, so hopefully you guys caught that about the lenses. If you didn't, it'll be on the video that we're going to post afterwards, so you can jump to that section. But yeah, continue to talk about that. They are coming out with lenses very fast, faster than any other manufacturer out there, and their G Master line is fantastic. I only took one lens with me. I actually took a Batis, but it was a native E-mount lens, and I ended up using that most of the time just because of the performance that you get over using a Metabones with a Canon lens. You get a much smaller AF area, so you don't get the full 693 AF points. It's only like the center portion of that, and it's just not as fast. I found it hunting quite a bit and jumping back and forth and not being able to lock on focus. And even when it said it was locked on focus, it was off by quite a bit. So I think if you're going to plan on using this camera, I would definitely go with a native mount lens, especially the G Master line, just because those are built for the performance that this camera can offer.
Yeah, paired with a G Master lens, the autofocus and the tracking capabilities of this camera for sports is tremendous. And that's why we'd really love to see some of the big glass, because I think in and of itself, this camera is a phenomenal sports camera because of, and one of the big selling features of this camera is the 20 frames per second with zero blackout. That's a feature that for sports photographers, you don't know how good that is until you use it for the first time.
And then you don't have it.
And then you don't have it with the digital SLR. And I was going back and forth between this camera and actually a 5D4 at the time, just testing them side by side. And the zero blackout on this is absolutely remarkable. Never losing your subject while shooting because of the shutter is tremendously powerful, and being able to hit that at 20 frames a second. People are like, well, 20 frames a second, I mean, you're gonna be shooting a ton of images, and yes, that's true. But with very fast sports action, there's nothing that does that like the A9.
Right.
And that makes it tremendously powerful, where you know you're not missing anything. It's almost like you're shooting video, it's so quick. But it really requires the ability to use the big long lenses like the 400 2.8, and as you were saying, Greg, only having that center portion and not having really the full confidence of the autofocus when paired through a Metabones. That's kind of a big downside on the sports side to a camera like this, when you have to get the shot. So
yeah, definitely. And going back to that, talking about the 20 frames per second, did you notice any downsides besides like the massive amount of photos that you now have to go through afterwards, and not being able to shoot full uncompressed RAW? You could only do it with a compressed RAW if you were even doing 30 or 20, or if you were just sticking with like the 12 frames per second.
Yeah, I mean, the compressed RAW really didn't impact what I was doing. I shot it at 20 frames a second deliberately to try that feature on the camera, and it really didn't impact what I was doing. I think that there are shooters out there that would find that to be an issue, but even at 12 frames a second, I mean, it is tremendously powerful to be able to have that. The 1DX Mark II is 14 frames a second at its highest, which is incredibly quick. The 1DX Mark I was 12 frames a second, and that always provided plenty of shutter speed in order to make sure that we are getting all of the images that we need from a series. when you are shooting 20 frames a second, though, there is substantial download time in terms of the images copying to the card. It's shooting 20 frames a second, but that doesn't mean the images are writing to the card at 20 frames a second. So, in between, as those images are copying to the card, it's not so much like the buffer is filling up, because you can continue to shoot, but there's definitely lag. You can't access the menu during that time period and things of that nature. So as you're making adjustments on the fly, that write time can cause some problems in terms of continuously shooting or being able to quickly move back up to the eye to shoot the next sequence of events. So.
Yeah, you were talking about that, like after you had done a burst and you kind of were checking images really quick, you'd go back up to the eye and it would have a little bit of a lag. It wouldn't have the response time of an optical or a like mirror setup instead of the digital having to load onto the
being an EVF viewfinder, it's there's the natural sort of little bit of lag when you're trying to review your image and then bringing it back up to the eye. There's this little bit of a lag time between the image actually popping back up. The other factor for me is that when you're reviewing images on the sidelines, as you're shooting, the image doesn't come right up on the LCD screen. You can get it to come up in the optical viewfinder if you like, but you got to press the review button. And I'd like to see the image instantly, and I'm not sure if there's something in the menu settings that I missed that would allow that image to come up right away. But that definitely can get a little bit frustrating. So.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a spray and pray almost, like during the action, because you're not going to be able to stop quick, check it, and then reshoot again. You just kind of have to shoot all the way through it and then hope somewhere in there that you captured what you're looking for.
Exactly.
I guess, talking a little more about the EVF, it does have a super fast refresh rate, and looking through it, it's really hard to tell that it's a digital EVF. There's almost no lag when you're panning back and forth, which again is great for sports, but it's also nice to just be able to look through it and not have that lag time of if somebody's moving through the frame or something like that, you can just have it for shooting portraits and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of my issues always with mirrorless cameras was the EVF. It never felt natural to me. It never didn't have the feel of a what you would normally get with a digital SLR, that single lens reflex action where you're looking through and you're seeing what you're shooting. This EVF has alleviated some of that, and it's very responsive with panning. There doesn't seem to be any lag there. It's clear, clean, and you can tell where your focus is. So from that perspective, it's a vastly improved EVF.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I guess talking about a little more about the write speeds, we don't need to go into this too much, but just so you guys watching, it does have 2 SD card slots, which is a major upgrade from the A7S and the A7R. 2 and 1, they only had 1 SD card slot. So that's really nice to have just for redundancies. You can back up a JPEG to one and RAW to another. You can do the same thing to both cards, or you can even do video to one card and photo to another card. Just a nice little feature that they've added to be aware of if you're looking between the A7 and the A9.
Lots of options on this camera. There are so many custom functions and menu settings that you can adjust and change, from the way the images write to the cards to the way that the functions and the buttons operate on the back of the camera. And it's almost overwhelming with just how much you can customize this camera. I like options, but it almost feels, when you're going through the menu settings on the camera, it almost feels a little overwhelming. But it's nice to have that there. It's nice to be able to say, oh, well, I like this button to be my rear button focus. I like the function button to do this, or, it has several C1, C2, C3 buttons that can all be changed to incorporate different features and functions on the camera. So if you want something to control your ISO, it's all there for you. So.
Yeah, it also has, along with the C1 and C2, it has a lot of custom functions. So it has 3 menus, but then on each of those, there's also 3 memory banks. So you really get, 12 different custom settings that you can jump between really quickly just by doing a recall of a memory, which is really nice. I guess moving on from that, we can talk a little bit about, we kind of mentioned some of the quirks, but video quirks in particular. So just stating right off the bat, this is a photo camera. It's not designed for video. Yes, it does have some video features, but it's not really designed as the A7S II upgrade. You do get 4K in full frame, which is really nice, so you don't have a crop. And you can also do 120 frames per second in 1080 with no crop on the sensor, where on the A7S, you did punch in almost 2 times, so you'd have to think about your lens selection when you were doing that. There's been a lot of questions as well about the picture profiles, since these have been removed from this camera, the ones that were on the A7, and there's no S-Log anymore. I've had some questions. Do they plan on putting it on in firmware? Are they going to wait for an upgrade? My personal opinion is that they're probably going to wait for the upgrade, so it's going to be the A9S that they're going to release all the video features in, just like they did with the A7 series. They figure most people are shooting RAW, and it is really nice to have those picture profiles. I'm not quite sure why they got rid of all of them, including S-Log, but I think it's just sort of to prepare themselves for the next version or model of this camera.
Yeah. There's got to be something to upgrade to. So
yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess the other thing is we were talking about the lenses not really having a selection, but they do have a bunch of telephoto lenses. Some of them have been announced, like the 400 2.8, and then I'm sure they're going to be releasing a bunch either later this year or the beginning of next year to really fill out this line.
Yeah, and honestly, with the announcement of something like the 408, they're clearly targeting the sports market, which makes a lot of sense, especially for this camera. As being a Canon loyalist for many years, I would say that this camera paired with a 400 2.8 Sony lens for sidelines work that's a big selling feature, to be able to have a camera that can shoot the frame rate that this camera shoots with zero blackout from a sidelines with tracking capability. It just becomes a really, really powerful tool. I think as those lenses come out, you're going to see a major push, from sports photographers to start looking at this system, just because of the capability that it has from a sports camera perspective.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's. Do you have any final thoughts on it?
The one thing I would say is I think one of the things that people have asked a lot of is what's the file like? When you compare a RAW file from the Sony A9 compared to a Canon 1DX, and there's a lot of tests and things that go back and forth with what provides the better image out of camera. I think what I noticed most about the A9's RAW file coming out of camera compared to the Canon is this feels a bit more polished. So I feel like the, from just a RAW file standpoint, I think that the Canon files feel a little bit less, there's less contrast, there's less sharpness, and a lot of that's done exactly for that reason, is that you have a RAW file to work with and you can make those decisions in post. I feel like the Sony file comes out with a little bit more saturation, a little bit more contrast. The image feels a bit more polished out of body, and that may work really well for some people, and for some people that that may be not to their liking. I think from a photographer's standpoint nowadays, we're so spoiled by the gear that we shoot with, because the capabilities of these cameras today are tremendous. And whether you're shooting with Canon, Nikon, or Sony, I really feel like, and I've been saying this for a long time, is that it's really what feels right to you as a shooter, what you're comfortable with, what you're used to, or what you're accustomed to. And when I was going through both the 5D4 files and the Sony A9 files, there were aspects of the images that I liked from both cameras. There's definitely a different feel. It's a different feel to the Sony files, the Sony RAW files, and the Sony and the Canon RAW files. But at the end of the day, when I go through and I batch process everything and I kind of fill it in, they're almost indistinguishable, because I adjust it
just
to
how
my
you're
liking.
editing.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I guess here's the big question that a lot of people might want to know. Are you, in the future, maybe once there's more lenses out, would you consider switching from your Canon setup to Sony?
I think at the high end of the line, so for my commercial photography, my studio portrait photography, there's so many things that I like about the Canon. I love how many different lens options I have. I love working with their systems. I like the way that the fit and feel of the camera is, just very at home with it. I think from a sports photography standpoint, it becomes a little bit more of a difficult question to answer. I think once I have the opportunity to go hands-on with something like a 400 millimeter 2.8 lens, at $4,500, this becomes a really attractive sports camera.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking $2,000 or $1,500 more in the Canon line for a camera that has the same or close to the same capabilities as this camera. ISO, performance, shutter speed, just everything about this camera screams sports camera. And really the only thing holding it back right now is the lens selection on it. I think once that part of the equation is answered, I think you're going to be seeing a lot of these cameras on the sidelines throughout both the NFL and NBA and gymnastics. I think there's just a huge market for Sony when it comes to this camera on the sports side. So I'm excited for it. I think it's great. I think it builds competition and adds a new dynamic to the sidelines with what you normally sees the Nikon D5 and the Canon 1DX Mark II. I think this brings in a new a new manufacturer to that market, and I think it's going to be a really fun and interesting camera to see on the sidelines. So,
for sure. Cool. I guess that's our spiel about it and what we're going to talk. Again, if you have any questions, we're going to be going through the live chat, so if you have them, I'm just going to run through them right now, and we'll answer any questions that you guys have. So let's go back to the top here. Does it shoot DCI? No, it does not shoot DCI 4K. Let's see. Underwater housing. Currently, I don't believe Icolite makes an A9 housing.
They don't.
You can get generic ones, but I'm sure Icolite will be coming out with one for this very soon.
They have them for the A7 series. It only makes sense for them then to transition over to the A9, and knowing Icolite, they're already probably in the process of working on it. So
yeah, for sure. Did it overheat? Do you have any problems with overheating?
I didn't, and I shot. So I shot an entire day's worth of events with this, at both an NFL preseason game and a cheering event earlier in the day. So I spent 10 hours solid shooting with this camera. With the vertical grip. Never once did I, and it was an extremely hot day that I was shooting on. Never once had an overheating issue with it. Granted, I shot no video, but it was all still photography. But I shot a lot of frames. I put a tremendous amount of frames through the camera, and used it extensively, and never had any overheating issues once.
Yeah. Me as well. I mean, I was in Sweden, so it was fairly cold there when I was there, so I didn't have any problems either. And I was just doing mostly travel around, small, short clips here and there. I wasn't shooting for an extensive period of time. Let's see. Does it have a good HDMI out? It has a micro HDMI out, I believe. Let's see here. Got it on the side. Yes, I believe that's the micro HDMI out. I'm not sure what you mean by good. You can send a clean signal out if you're going to record on like a Shogun or something like that. So I guess in that case, it's good, yes. What is the highest ISO you would push this camera to? I got a question for you. Is that photo or video? Because those are a little bit different in how the camera processes it.
I will tell you on the still side, I wasn't afraid to take it up to 6400. I really didn't need to go any further than that. But the images seem really clean. I was shooting a night game under stadium lights, and it performed extremely well. In fact, I wasn't even afraid to put it into auto ISO for a little while just to test it to see how it did. And the images look very usable. Sony's technology, obviously, in low light is renowned, and the A9 is really no different than the rest of their lineup. It's done a very, very good job, very clean performance at higher ISOs. I think I'd like to try it at a higher ISO setting just to see how far I can push it, but certainly at 6400, it was a solid camera.
Yeah. And for video, I didn't really push it too high, but I would feel comfortable going to 3200 at least. Maybe 6400 depending on the situation, but 3200 was fine. Let's see, kind of answer this question. As an all-arounder including image quality, reliability, and bang for your buck, would you rather have this or the 1DX Mark II? kind of answered that.
Yeah, I think we got into that a little bit. I mean, I think it is a feel. I think that's a big factor in this industry, and I think sometimes, we're so technology spoiled nowadays that it's easy for people to favor one or the other. But I honestly think that this becomes a real contender in the sports market because of things like the amazing autofocus system in it when it's paired with a G Master lens. But the no blackouts at 20 frames a second is just phenomenal. Like I didn't know I missed it until I actually shot with it. It was really incredible. But I love the Canon 1DX Mark II. I love the 5D Mark IV for everything that they are. And I think that this is definitely a viable candidate in that same market. So,
yeah, for me, I think I would probably take this camera over a 1DX Mark II. The only big thing that it's lacking, which we keep talking about, is the lack of lenses in the lineup that are native E-mount that can perform to support this camera's autofocus and everything that this camera has to offer. So I think once they expand the line, then this will definitely come up and be better than the 1DX Mark II in most cases.
Yeah, I maybe call me a Canon loyalist. I really, for me, I love the 1DX Mark II, like I said, for a lot of the feel of the camera, and I think that that's really important in this business, is for you to be comfortable with the equipment you're using. The form factor of this camera is very small, but for some people that may not be an issue. I think for some people a smaller camera has its advantages and likes, and I think honestly that if that's not a factor, customizing this camera is really essential for whoever is using it, because it is so customizable and it is so easy to change the way the camera is set up. For somebody that is used to a big camera, there's going to be a little bit of fumbling around in the beginning with this. But like I said, at $1,500 cheaper than the Canon, it becomes a very serious competitor to both the D5 and the 1DX Mark II.
Yeah. What is the battery life like? I had really good battery performance. I mean, on and off shooting portraits and a little bit of video here and there, I was able to make one battery last a full day of traveling around and shooting and stuff like that. I mean, obviously pushing a little bit harder in sports stuff, you're going to go through them faster, but you were using the battery grip.
Yeah,
so.
I have to tell you, I was fearful of it because of sort of the A7S reputation of burning through batteries. I shot a 6-hour cheer event in the morning with dual batteries in the grip. And it was funny because I thought at one point I saw my battery indicator come on and I was like, wow, I went through 2 batteries during that whole session. But what it actually is doing is it's only draining from one of the batteries at a time. So I had actually after 6 hours of continuous shooting, I had another entire battery still available to me. So I was really surprised by that. I thought I had gone through the entire 2 batteries in about six hours. In reality, I'd only gone through one of them. So battery life on this camera is much better than what people are accustomed to with the A7 series. So
yeah, for sure. Looks like the last question on here: does it make sense to wait for the S and the R series? I mean, there's no confirmed thing out there that there will be an S or an R series. They might keep this just a photo line, but how they've been going with their other S series and before that, I think there will be one, and I think it probably is. If you're shooting video, it's worth waiting for the S version. If you are a photographer, then I think this camera is perfectly ready
everything you could
for what you would need.
Yeah, what you'd want. And I think also that depends on what your style of shooting is too. I mean, if you're a sports photographer, this camera's a no-brainer, I think. But if you do landscapes and you want big megapixel files, if there was a version like that, then I think there would be a market for that camera as well. But there's no confirmed talk yet of releasing other versions of this camera. So as a still camera, phenomenal.
Yeah, we covered that a little bit. I mean, it sticks with Sony's reputation of their amazing low light performance, and you can push it pretty far in both of our experiences with video and photo and not have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess.
I think
that's
that's it. No, I think that was. You know, I think I've said pretty much what I want to say. I think, you know, as I shoot with it more, and I will plan on shooting with it more, you know, I'll get a better feel for what the custom functions are on this camera, because like I said, it's option rich. So, but as a first sort of impression of the camera itself, I was very impressed.
Yeah. Cool. So thanks for everybody who joined the live chat. If you're watching this afterwards, thanks for checking out the video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you guys got something out of this. And if you want to rent or try out the A9 for yourself, head on over to LensProToGo.com. There'll be some links in the description and some other things that we have about it. If you have any other questions as well, if they weren't covered in this video, make sure to leave them in the comments and we'll try to get back to you as quick as we can. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
See
guys.
you guys in the next one.